Our fruits are flying and our swipe is working. But there is one big problem. Swipe is only a visual effect right now. It doesn't actually know when we have touched the fruit. So, in this episode, we are going to connect these two systems. We are going to take each small section of our swipe and turn it into temporary collision shape and ask Godot which fruit that shape touches. And by the end, swiping over a fruit would actually trigger our fruit's slice function. So, let's get started. Let's first understand what we are going to build. So let's say you have a swipe like this. What I can do is I can name this as a point A and name this as a point B. I want to essentially find out if any of the fruit has touched the line. Since line 2D is only a drawing shape and not a physics object, it cannot do so. So what I would do instead is I would add a collision rectangle right on top of this line. And this collision rectangle would detect whether or not our fruit has been sliced. So it seems pretty straightforward. So I take the last point, I take the first point and draw a rectangle in between them. But it's not as simple as that. It's a bit tricky. So imagine I have a slice like this. So point 1, point 2 and point 3. So I went like this and I sliced it like this. And let's just slice it like this again. So now I have points A, B, C and D. Going by our original logic, I would take the last point and the first point and I would draw something like this. And it would be pretty accurate if your slice length is low, but it won't be that accurate if you want the precise values, the precise cuts, and to give the player a real experience. So what we're gonna do is instead, if we have some points like this, let's say A, B and C, then we would first calculate a collision here and the next collision here. And then we would check if our fruit collides with any of those collisions. So as many points as we have, as many segments as we get, each segment gets a collision shape. Now let's jump back to our code and let's actually try to do it. Let's add a few variables which we would need to make our collision shapes that would detect the swipe later. The first variable is a constant swipe width. This would be how thick our collision rectangle would be. Next, we would have a previous point variable which would be initialized at vector 2.0. We would need this because every time the mouse moves, we need to know where the previous part of the swipe ended. Then we have an array which is sliced fruits. It would contain all our fruits which are already sliced. As we saw earlier, since we have lots of segments, our fruits could be sliced multiple times by each collision, so we need a global variable where we could see if the fruit is already sliced and avoid slicing it again. And finally, we are creating a rectangle shape, which I would name as swipe shape. This is the collision shape that we'll use for every segment. Now let's make a small change when our swipe starts. You can come here and I would write if swiping previous point equal to event dot position. So we'll store the current mouse position in previous point and we would also clear our sliced fruits when we are swiping. I would also move the line dot clear points inside this swiping since we won't clear the points only when our swipe begins. If I play the scene, you won't see any visible difference as the only thing I have done is set the previous point and clear the queue. Now we are going to add an important part. Every time the mouse moves, we already add a new point to our line. We are going to use those same 2 points for our collision detection. previous point where the previous part of swipe ended and event.position where the new part ends. So just below the point times.append, what I do is I would add method. I haven't actually created the function yet, but this is the function that would actually check one part of our swipe and its collisions. After this is done, I would again set our previous point to event.position so that our previous point won't be calculated again if our mouse is not moving. Now let's actually write the check segment function. It would contain two parameters, that is the start, which we set as the previous point. It would be a vector 2, and the next one would be end, which would also be a vector 2. In our function segment, we can simply write var direction equal to end minus start. This would give us the direction in which our segment is facing. Then we can also get the distance between the two by simply writing direction dot length. We need this because our collision rectangle needs to be exactly as long as this part of swipe. After this, I would write a simple defensive check, which is if distance equal to zero point 0, that is a start and end are at the same points, then we just return. We'll do nothing, we just return. Next, we need to know where our rectangle should be placed and which direction it should face. So we would add a new variable called center, which would be the center of our segment. Its value would be simply start plus end by 2. Note I'm doing 2.0 here or 0.0 here because we're dealing with float values. If I just divide it by 2, it would just give me an end value. Then I could add another variable called angle, whose value would be direction dot angle. This gives us the angle of swipe segment. So if player swipes horizontally, a rectangle would be horizontal. If they swipe diagonally, the rectangle will rotate with the swipe. Now we can give our rectangle its size. We can do something like swipe shape dot size equal to vector 2 distance comma swipe width. The first value is distance we calculated, so that it becomes the length of the rectangle, and second value is exactly how long the section of swipe is. Now just to show you how the collisions actually work, I would go to debug and turn on visible collision shapes. And you could see that our apples have the collision shapes which we have assigned, but our swipe won't have any collision shape. We are making it in the runtime, and Godot's editor only detects or shows only the collision shapes that are present from the start using the collision shape 2D. So I would just go ahead, go back to my code, and I would add some code. What I'm basically doing is calculating the distance again, the center again, and just drawing a rectangle for our reference. And I'm calling the method from the check segment to just show you how it would actually look. So if I play the scene again with this code, you can see our collision is now visible. You can see the tiny rectangles if you look closely, that our swipe is actually made of few tiny rectangles. Nothing is happening yet because we have not done anything when the collision occurs, but the collision is present. We can be sure of that one fact. So I would just go ahead and remove this because we don't need it anymore. Now as you saw, we have our rectangle, but we still haven't asked Godot to check it. For that we need a physics query. Think of this query as a question we are preparing to ask our physics engine. So I would add a variable query and set its value to be physics shape query parameters 2d.new. Now the first thing we would tell our query is which shape we would want to use. So we already have created a shape. We would just assign it that shape, that is swipe shape Then we would further tell it how it is rotated and how it's positioned. So now Godot exactly have a rectangle rotated and transformed, and it knows exactly where to check. Now we need to access the physics world of our current scene. So we would just get that. I would name the variable as space state, and I would initialize it as get world 2D since it is a 2D scene, and direct space state. Until now, everything was just a setup for this line, which is our results. And all the setup we did till now was for this results, which is pasted dot intersect shape, which basically tells if is the space of our 2D world is intersecting with our shape which we derived from the query. Now since we have done a lot of work and finally got the result, let's see if it's correct or not. To see it, we would first print the result and see whether it's actually colliding with our fruits or not. So I would write a simple for loop which would get our collider, and then I would just print the collider's name. And that's it. Now I would run the scene. And if I go back to my debug, you can see all these collisions are present. You have collided with fruit, rigid body 2, rigid body 2, rigid body 3, and rigid body 4. So it is actually colliding and the collision seems to be working fine. Now we can safely remove this print statement and instead make the fruit slice on when the collision happens. So what I would write instead of the print statement is if collider, so in our case collider is fruit, so maybe just to avoid confusion I would write fruit here and fruit here as well. Now if fruit has method slice, then we would call fruit.slice. Now we need to connect this to our fruit as well. So we would go to our fruit scene and add a method called slice. For now we would just print something like fruit sliced. I would also turn off full screen for now so that we could see it. So while cutting you could see the fruit sliced is appearing now. But you can see that it has appeared so many times, even more times than our fruit was cut. This is because the same fruit is being cut multiple times. So now let's fix that as well. We would go back to our swipe trail and inside our results I would add another statement. If this fruit is in our sliced fruits which we declared earlier, then just continue. So it would ignore our statements further and it would continue on the next iteration of the loop. And if it is not present in our sliced fruits, we would add it to our sliced fruits and then we would call fruit.slice again. If I run the scene now, you can see each fruit can be only sliced once. And now it's pretty much more decent than it was before. Now everything is set up and we can do anything we want inside our slice function. And our swipe trail or main doesn't need to know what is happening to the fruit inside of this slice function. It can be controlled directly through our fruit.gd, which is exactly what we are gonna do in our next episode. We would visually display a fruit being split into two parts. So stay tuned, and if you like the video be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next one.